Hello and welcome everyone. We have a lot to cover for you today, so we're going to jump right in and get the show going. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Charles Ross. I'm Tanium's Chief Customer Officer, and I'm going to be your host and MC for the webinar today. And I want to start by saying that we're very grateful for everyone who is in attendance today. We know we've got prospects, we know we've got customers, we know we've got partners here with us. We're grateful that you could attend. We wish it was under better circumstances, but we're going to get through this together. We know this is a time where folks want to be looking forward to spending time with their family and friends. And our intention is to be able to give you guys answers to what you guys are dealing with out there today with Log4j, make this very simple, make this very streamlined, and get you some time back during a very important time of year. So I want to start with some introductions of the folks that are joining me. I've got a very esteemed group of experts with me today on this call, starting with Chris Hollenbach, who's Tanium's Internal Chief Information Security Officer, Melissa Bishoping, who's our Endpoint Security Research Specialist, and Jim Kelly, who's our Vice President of Endpoint Security. So next I'll cover our agenda, and then we'll get right into the discussion here. So what we want to cover for you today, there's a couple topics related to obviously Log4j. We want to start by telling you what we know about the vulnerability. This is a very evolving set of circumstances, as we all know. Every day we're learning new information, and we want to give you the current view of what we're seeing out in the field today. We want to walk you through how you can use Tanium to address this vulnerability. And it obviously is a very, very difficult one. Lots of nuanced details. We're actually going to walk through a demo of the product as well, so we can actually show you in real time exactly how you'd use Tanium to solve this. And then last, we want to discuss some of the questions, the burning questions that we're getting left and right from customers. We also want to hear questions that you might have as well. So throughout the course of the event here, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A window, and at the end, we're going to hopefully get some time to go through those questions as well. But quick introduction of Tanium. I'd be remiss if I didn't give you at least the overview of Tanium real quick. Tanium is a platform for real-time visibility control across all your IT assets. We cover OT, IoT, traditional assets. If you're as old as I am, we cover Solaris, we cover AIX. We're going to get into all the details of Tanium, but as it relates to Log4j, there's obviously a life cycle of events that need to happen. We can help with the identification of vulnerable instances. We can help you with the threat hunting and looking for signs of exploitation. And then finally, we can help with the remediation and patching. We're going to go through all of this. We're going to show you all the details over the next hour here. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter here, Chris Hollenbach, to walk through the details of the vulnerability. Chris.
Thanks, Charles. When this vulnerability came out, it took a brief moment for everyone to fully understand the scope and potential impact of this. Didn't take long, but it did take everyone a brief moment to realize. The reason for this is because Log4j is embedded in any number of places. It's Java. It's also cross-platform, which means that this vulnerability, attackers don't have to write code in the same way they might have to otherwise to hit a lot of different platforms at the same time. So this is a supply chain related vulnerability, not an attack necessarily, but the importance is that people don't necessarily know where this thing exists in their environment. It's usually embedded in other applications. It may ship with other applications. So it leaves people wondering where it is and how to find it in their environment. And that's been one of the greatest challenges out of this. For ourselves, for Tanium, we use Tanium itself to do some of that searching and to understand where it is internally in our environment. And from a software perspective, our development of our own product, we maintain bills of material around what we produce in our software. We have an approval process for use of third-party libraries in our products. So we have a relatively easy mechanism for understanding what do we ship in our own product. And so we were able to fairly early on say, no, we don't have Log4j in anything that we currently ship to our customers. And then it took a little bit longer for us to be 100% certain of where we were for our internal environment. And then to be able to say, this is what we're doing about those few instances where we do have the issue in our environment. The important thing to understand with this is there is not a high barrier, that there is proof of concept code out there. There's a lot of exploit code out there, and we are seeing actors try to exploit this. We've seen it against Tanium infrastructure unsuccessfully, but in other cases, there's reports of malware coming out in the environment as well. And if we could jump to the next slide here. That includes going to things like ransomware, as already being pushed out there into Linux servers and places of that sort. So the attackers aren't skipping a beat on this one. They're moving forward very quickly. Some of the exploitation happened by Tuesday and Wednesday following the initial reveal of this issue, and there's been further refinements of it. What we're seeing, though, also is that this isn't going to be the last of these attacks. We'll talk more about that later on during Q&A and some other areas, but this is the current issue. And this is the issue of the moment. It is incredibly urgent. We're also seeing attackers do more research around Log4j to understand that there may be other vulnerabilities in it. We're seeing additional releases of Log4j to fix those other issues. So you're not going to be done once you patch the current round. And that's an important thing. You might buy yourself some time with some of the workarounds after you identify where you have Log4j in your environment, but just understand that you might have to do this same exercise several times over the ensuing weeks. That gets us to the discussion at hand. How do you find this in your environment? And then after you've found it in your environment, how do you start to think about remediating it? And then what do you do to find out whether anyone's trying to exploit your environment with this? So for that, I want to turn it over to Melissa to have that part of the conversation.
Sorry about that, was coming off mute. So yeah, good morning, and thank you again, everyone for coming. Just another reminder, if you do have questions, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A as we go. So I want to talk for a minute about the complexity and sort of the state of things that we're seeing right now. Log4j is a very challenging vulnerability for everyone to be able to identify and to be able to remediate. And one of the other challenges is specifically around vulnerability scanning. We get asked about, is vulnerability scanning here going to be enough? And the vulnerability scanning definitions take time to develop, and these things are often built on, known exploitable or known vulnerable pieces of software. As those are being defined and implemented, you've got to be able to go proactively hunt through your environment, find the repackaged versions of the libraries, and really start understanding your attack surface. So we've got this gap in time from when the vulnerability was announced all the way to when the stable definitions are defined, they're implemented in products, and those are going to continue to iterate over time as we learn more about the vulnerability and as the attacker learns about new ways to get around and bypass some of the protections. So during this time, it's incredibly valuable to be able to go deep in and beyond the file hash, beyond the file name, or beyond even the application version, and really examine at a deep level what's on the endpoint and the capabilities there. So if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So this is where we want to talk a little bit about what your options are within Tanium. For identifying some of the vulnerable instances, we've published a lot of guidance around using threat response and Tanium reveal and the indexing capabilities there to identify these vulnerable instances in minutes. We've seen tons of customers be able to successfully roll this out over the last week and immediately begin getting hits in their environment that they were blind to beforehand. So this allows you to look for not just the specific file name, but also going into those jar files and looking for the repackaged versions of Log4j. Then you have the ability to upload the Yara rules that will help you detect the incidents and alert on them for any attempted exploitation. And be able to then further pivot that investigation to collect evidence or to quarantine. And then we talk about the remediation effort. And this is going to be something that is ongoing for the next several months. Over the next couple of weeks and months, we're going to see vendors release these patched versions And you need to be able to automate those software upgrades as soon as possible and get those vulnerabilities closed. And to continue going over time, looking at those compliance and vulnerability scans, being able to track your progress and being able to see that attack surface reduce. And so from here, we're just going to take a quick minute and go into a little bit of a demo of some of the guidance that we've provided in our community article. So I'm going to share my screen. So many of you have seen our community article here on community.tanium.com about how we can help with this vulnerability. There is a lot of guidance in here, and I want to take a minute to highlight a couple of specific things. So after you've deployed threat response and reveal in your environment and you began indexing these systems, you can actually use questions that we have provided for you here that you can copy and paste straight from the blog post into your console and search in real time to start getting back these values. This is a very powerful capability because you need to understand that attack surface as it evolves, as new systems come online that may have been offline for a holiday or a weekend. This gives you the ability to track and report and then know where you need to start looking. We also want to talk about the ability that you have with threat response to, as you find vulnerable systems, look for parent-child relationships, look for additional signs of compromise, look for network connections that may be exposed there. And then once you have that data, and I'm going to give it a second to come back here. We'll keep talking for a second while that's coming back. Once you've got this data, you have the ability to create trends boards, to report on it, or to create reports that you can then export and evaluate in real time. And as you can see here, we've got several files that have come back that are showing as a vulnerable version. This is the 2.14. So this gives us a place where we can start pivoting our investigation. We also want to talk about the ability in threat response to see alerts in your environment. So if you go in and upload that Intel document for the Yara rule that we've linked to in the community article, which you can see I have done here, we've already got evidence of 2 different hits of what this Yara rule is looking for, which are potential signs of exploitation. And you can further expand and see that this was in a webserver.log file on one of our endpoints. This is going to be powerful, not only for you to search via like quick search to go and look for existing signs, but also to get that real-time alerting, which then can allow you to quarantine the endpoint or to deploy collection packages to gather forensic evidence and contain the incident before it has a chance to spread. As we mentioned before, we also have the ability with deploy for you to be able to build packages and to be able to either from our package gallery or importing your own, be able to deploy the software updates that are going to be essential to remediation over the next couple of weeks. One of the most important aspects, though, we've talked about this a lot in the article and we're talking about this a lot in the community, is the use of reveal. Reveal is traditionally a risk and compliance tool used for finding sensitive data on the endpoint. We've found, though, that there's a really novel use case here to be able to look for evidence of those jar files by diving deep into layers of the application instead of relying on just a file hash or a file name. So this capability is important. This is something that is giving you a visibility that no other tool can provide. So here, based off the guidance in the article, we have created rules and created a rule set. This will go out and look at the data on the endpoint, looking layers deep to find evidence based on those rules of that Log4j version information inside the file. And as you can see here, we have an endpoint where the rule has hit on a specific version. This is again based off of the data in the article that we posted. Once that is identified, you can actually connect to that endpoint directly. And you immediately see specifically which files. And one of the important things I want to point out here is that we're not basing this off of it has to be log4j.jar, right? This is a file that does not have log4j in the name, but if we open it up, you can actually see where the information comes from, which gives your security teams a really powerful ability to pivot their investigation to start investigating what file, what software is this associated with? And then we can look at where else is it in our environment? Do we see any suspicious relationships or any suspicious network connections coming out of whatever this program might be? So they can validate and then they can pivot and move forward. And I think that's probably one of the most unique approaches to being able to proactively hunt while you wait for your vendors and other software providers or your development teams to be able to patch. Being able to go out and look for this ahead of time is a very unique and very powerful capability. So I am going to stop my screen share. And I am going to pass that back.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Melissa, for walking us through that. And next, what we're going to do is we're going to pivot and start asking the panelists some questions here. So we've obviously got a lot of things on people's minds right now, and we've got some questions that are coming in from the Q&A window as well. But I want to go back, Chris, to something you started out with, and you talked about, we've seen things like struts, and we've seen NPM and all these other attacks in the past. How is Log4j similar, and how is it different?
Well, it's similar in that this is embedded in so many other applications. It's shipped with so many other applications. It's a dependency that people wouldn't necessarily be aware of in their products. You go out and you buy or install something larger, you don't realize this is a constituent component of it. So when a vulnerability does come out, you've got an effort underway then to have to go find these things. And it's not always obvious or easy to find them. It's different in this case in that it is Java based. So Java is cross-platform by its very nature, which makes this sort of an attack easier to write for. So if you're an attacker and you want to write exploits for this, write it once and you can impact a lot of different platforms. It's ubiquitous around the environment, so it's very easy to remotely exploit this. This is a CVSS score of 10. So this means it is the most severe thing you could have. To give you an idea of just how oddly scoped this one is, the Perseverance rover on Mars has Log4j in it. They actually bragged about it at the time that it was getting pushed out there, right? I mean, it's a great thing. Now, because of bandwidth restrictions and other stuff, they don't have to worry about that being exploited. The rest of us mere mortals here on Earth, we're going to have a lot of systems that are going to be far more accessible to attackers. So that's, I think that's the big thing. It's so ubiquitous that it's going to be with us for a while as a problem.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. And I'm going to open the next question up to whoever wants to take a stab at it. But one of the things I've heard throughout the week with customers is I've got a vulnerability scanner, I've got AV, I'm fine, I'm seeing what I need to see, I'm learning about the what's happening in my environment. Is that enough, do you guys think?
Not at all. AV is a backstop. It catches certain types of low-hanging fruit, but inevitably stuff gets passed. So you can't rely on that as your sole mechanism. A lot of vulnerability scanners, we're getting commentary from a number of our customers where they're seeing a 10x difference between what Tanium is finding versus a standard vulnerability scanner is finding in some of their environments. That's a huge difference.
I was going to say, I think it's really important to call out too that, the vulnerability scanners and AV, those are really important parts of your security solution, but this needs to be approached from a more hunt mentality. You're going out looking for this stuff at a really deep layer. You're not relying on signatures. And a lot of times vulnerability scanners or your AV is signature driven. Your teams need to be adopting more of that proactive hunting investigative methodology. Got it.
So when we look at Log4j, do you guys think this is, like the tip of the iceberg of more to come? Or do you think this is kind of one of those, like, we just found the needle in the haystack of, this weird Minecraft thing that all of a sudden became a bigger thing than we all expected?
No, I can start with that. So just to level set a little bit, there was actually a Black Hat presentation that happened in 2016 that called out some of this JNDI potential vulnerability and abuse. So there were things that were already known. What's happened now, however, is because this has gotten the publicity that it has, what it's done in the industry is you've got a ton of security researchers and people that are looking at this to be able to leverage it from potentially bad places to do bad things, are now looking at this code and other things like it under a microscope to see what else they can make this do. So it is going to continue to evolve. We're going to see other things come from this, and it could be months before we see the last conversation around Log4j, unfortunately. Chris?
Yeah, every time one of these things happens, it starts out usually as a very academic thing. Some researcher comes out with it. It may or may not have a practical attack for it. And then once someone demonstrates a practical wide scale attack for something, it's success breeds success sort of a mentality. And you'll see so many more researchers want to come into this area to refine existing attacks and find new and novel approaches that build off of this one, as Jim said. So this is just going to encourage more research and more exploitation and new vulnerabilities that we don't know about yet.
Got it. So I'm gonna pivot over. We've got some questions coming in. I'm gonna pick one of them for us to address here. So, and this is another thing I've been hearing is maybe we just need to wait for vendors to catch up, figure out what's impacted or not, and as we get those vendor alerts, just patch as quickly as we can for impacted versions. Is that the right approach first? And then second, where do you even find lists like this of all the impacted versions of vendor software right now?
Yeah, I can start on that one. So I think, obviously there's going to be a lot of situations where you cannot directly patch this yourself. You are going to be waiting on that updated version. That doesn't mean you want to lose the visibility that you have. You need to be able to at least see where your attack surface is, apply the mitigations where they're appropriate, or at least know that this is something you need to be tracking down. So I think that is probably one of the things I want to really underscore. As far as vulnerable applications, several governments, including the US, have CISA that are maintaining a list of vulnerable applications. We're also looking at opportunities there to assist by getting some of those packages and deploy and helping our customers build those as they become made available. But I know like the Dutch government, they have their CERT team that's publishing lists. So as software providers begin notifying and saying, yes, we've got a fixed version, or yes, we have a vulnerable version and we're TBD for a fix, those are being updated in real time pretty much every day, and we are constantly monitoring those as well. So be on the lookout, definitely, and leverage Tanium to find those applications and cross-reference them. But also know that you need to be looking for maybe the companies that haven't found that evidence or haven't disclosed it yet, and you still need to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's a scary thing, I think, is that there's just so many dependencies on this library out there in software. And I think we've seen all the major vendors that are responding quickly, but those little applications that people are running that have no idea that, or even running inside the organization and then realize, oh my gosh, it's got dependencies on Log4j that we had no idea about, I think is what we're all going to be dealing with. When we start thinking about the remediation itself, though, and we start, obviously go through the patching and other efforts to get this out of the environment, how would we use Tanium to track remediation and validate the fixes are actually happening?
So I can take some of that. We've got an entire team of people, our community inside of Tanium, a group of amazing people, and we're working on providing guidance, some custom questions, some trends dashboards, some other ways to be able to help track this in real time and give you some better visibility on it. This is, as Melissa was stating, this is an evolving conversation. Our community article is being updated as we go through and find new information, as we get new questions to be able to filter some of these things down. It's going to take us some time to be able to get the perfect answer. And I don't think anybody out in the industry right now has a perfect answer because of the complexity of where all of this could reside. We're seeing questions in chat and QA around, the Yara rule is looking in varlog in Linux machines, but that's not valid for Windows machines. What would I do? The reality is because of where this could all be, you need to know your environment. You need to do a bit of hunting. And that's why with Reveal being the novel use case that it is, it allows us to be able to get a better view across the entire system where not necessarily knowing where you're logging this information to be able to scope a Yara rule correctly, this gives you a bit more insight to be able to find places where you may have missed with index.
Got it. So I have a question as well that I don't know that we're talking enough about, but I think it's important to think about is, we obviously got our own environments to deal with, and that's enough of a challenge to deal with. But how about third-party risk, and how would Tanium help manage third-party risk as it's, as they're being exposed to Log4j as well?
A couple of different things on that front. For one, for a lot of organizations, that's just going to be questionnaire driven to their third parties to understand whether they have the issues. But also, it's easy enough to point people towards resources such as our website to help them understand, here's some guidance on how to go find these things. And even we have free trials of Tanium, our POC that you can sign up for to use our software to go look for these things. So if you're an organization that has third-party suppliers and you're concerned about whether or not they're adequately addressing this, you could even point them towards signing up for a POC with Tanium so that they can go through and evaluate their own environments as well to get a better assurance around what they're doing. Right now, most organizations, they're doing questionnaires and hoping that people are finding things and filling out spreadsheets correctly. You need a more technical solution towards this problem. Tanium is one of those resources that people can utilize.
What are you guys hearing as you talk to customers about common misconceptions around Log4j?
I can speak to this a little bit. We've had a lot of conversations with customers who are really trying to digest this information as fast as we are. But I think one of the common misconceptions is that this is something that they can just go and look at a list of the software in their environment and know. And as we've mentioned before, it's not that simple. I think one of the other important things is the assumption that you can patch it yourself. There are mitigations you can apply, but those definitely need to be seen as you're buying time until the vendor provides you or your development teams provide you an official fix. And I think that's probably the second largest misconception that we're hearing. So knowing that you have to go deeper than just an installed application or just a specific version. And thirdly, I think that there's a lot of customers who think, oh, well, if my systems are behind a firewall and they're not touching the internet, then I can't be exploited. Attackers are going to leverage this at every phase of the attack chain. They're going to be trying to do pivoting. They're going to set up persistence through this. So just because a system isn't on the public internet doesn't mean that you're not going to see exploit attempts against it.
Got it. Now, when customers start looking for this stuff, and let's assume they're thinking about Tanium and bringing it in, how long does it take before they start seeing things that they might be exposed on? And then, based off your guys' experience as well, and I know this thing is only a week old, how prevalent is it in environments? Is it something you see like one in every 1,000 hosts, or are we seeing it like on almost every host and many different instances on every host? What are you guys seeing so far? Sorry, I put two questions in one there. Sorry about that. We'll start with the first one. How quickly can they figure out they're exposed? We'll go to the second one after that.
I think one of the, sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I was going to say, probably we're talking the same thing. The initial implementation is going to depend on how much time a customer can dedicate to actually putting some people on the ground to get this started. But in most cases that I've been involved with, we've seen deployment within hours, and within that time frame, we've seen 20 to 40% of their environment starting to respond back almost immediately. So we're able to take that information in almost real time if you think about the scale that we're talking about. But within hours, we're starting to get back hits on their environment. I know one of the customers that I was participating with earlier this week, we deployed to about 40,000 endpoints, and within an hour, we were starting to get hits back on some of their non-Windows environments, about 20% of their environment already, showing us where other questions, the index things, the pieces just weren't showing up, and Reveal was highlighting those areas where this was embedded somewhere deeper in their environment. So it's going to continue to get better as it has time to be pushed through the environment in full, but we are seeing things relatively quickly in a matter of hours. Melissa, any other comments?
No, I think the really important piece to hit on here is that, as Jim mentioned, as many resources as you have to throw at it, Tanium can act as a force multiplier. We allow them to pivot their investigations, to expand their scope, and really triage at a much faster rate.
Gotcha. And you showed Reveal, Melissa, and mentioned, we're using it for Log4j, and it's finding obviously some really interesting things with packed jar files and looking inside files and things like that. What are other use cases around Reveal that customers may not know exist? Because obviously we're seeing some really powerful stuff coming out of it.
So kind of as I mentioned when we were talking through Reveal, was originally designed to sort of be part of your risk and compliance. So looking for that sensitive data on disk, that could be personal identifying information, that could be credit cards, that could be passwords stored in plain text. There's a lot of capability there that will help you reduce your risk surface. But I think what we're exploring, because this has really opened up some novel discussions internally and with customers about the ability to leverage Reveal as part of that hunt team method and as part of the arsenal of tools that your hunt team has. So if you're using Reveal and have new ideas for how you can use Reveal, please reach out to us and talk to your TAMs. And we love that kind of dialogue and feedback because I think this is something that has really opened up a Pandora's box of new opportunities for how to leverage the tooling. And the really valuable piece of it is that it's extensible and it's dynamic, and Reveal is able to change based on not only the vulnerabilities, new changes or new details that are emerging, but be highly customizable to your environment and what you know to be true about the environment you're hunting in, and that's really powerful.
You also showed in the demo, you showed index as well, and there was a question that was submitted about difference between indexed and Reveal. How do you use each of them? When would you use each of them? Can you go into more detail around that?
So I'm happy to jump in on that if you want, Melissa. There's definitely a difference here between index and Reveal. The big thing around index is if you know the file name of what you're looking for, yeah, you can drop it in index, and if it's on disk and we found it, it's a really quick, easy way to identify not only the name of the file, but also the hash and potentially directory structure where it exists and all of those things. The challenge is that with the way that Linux can potentially execute applications out of a compressed file, you won't necessarily know what's inside of that compressed file just by doing an index search. So Reveal, the interesting piece about this and the use case that we were able to kind of pull out of this from what is traditionally a data privacy, data sensitivity tool, in the research industry, in the cyber industry, any tool becomes a security tool if it has the data I need. And in this case, because Reveal has the ability to drill into a zip file or structured text to actually look at what's in there, I can pull back version numbers of Log4j that may be attached in a manifest file, multiple layers deep inside of a compressed file that I wouldn't be able to see alone with index by itself.
Got it. And we obviously looked at those modules and threat response in the demo. Are there other modules as well within Tanium that folks should consider using, and what else are we seeing that is applicable for Log4j?
Yeah, I think there's what's really powerful is that once the Tanium client is on your endpoints and once you've got the tools deployed, you've got this very versatile platform, and you don't have to be worried about integrations between all different tool sets or different point solutions. You've got the ability to pivot your investigation using the same technology. And so, we've talked about things like looking at asset, which can help you start tracking, like once you've identified, yes, we know that this particular software is vulnerable, we need to really see where it is in our environment, how it's being used. You can start looking at like our software inventory and utilization content. You've got deploy, obviously, for patching. We've had conversations around things like integrity monitor to look for some of your more sensitive directories that might be getting modified. You've got map to be able to look at those dependencies or where databases might be getting written to and pivot points in your environment. So the entire platform really becomes a tool that you can use between your developers, between your security teams, your ops engineers, and they can start having those break down the silos conversations, which I think is going to be critical moving forward.
And even just trends boards to be able to keep track of the progress you're making. As you start to discover things in Reveal, do you go from those unconfirmed findings to confirmed findings, to those confirmed findings are going away because you're starting to remediate the issue in your environment? That is the other piece of this. So can I just show at a high level, how are we progressing with all this activity that we're doing on that platform?
And I think too, every tool in your arsenal right now needs to be something you consider. And that was kind of the point Jem was making a minute ago. Like, if you're in a security position right now, you are literally looking for every weapon you can possibly pull out against this thing. The beauty of Tanium is that we're dynamic and extensible enough to fit into your workflows and fit alongside those other tools to aid in the process.
There was a question about how what are signs that an endpoint might be exploited right now? What things are we seeing right now out there in the wild?
So I can start on some of that. I'm sure I don't have a definitive list, but I know the early attempts were pretty lackluster. Most of them were coin miners of some sort, pretty easy, low-hanging fruit kind of things. I think what we're seeing now, as we start to see this evolve and we start to see more eyes start to happen on this, we're starting to see more direct influence by attackers that are looking to make this a wormable attack, that are looking to potentially leverage this in nation state attacks as well. So I think this is one of those things that what we're seeing initially is just the tip of the iceberg, because it's very low, easy to do sort of things, where it's posting a coin miner or a token to an AWS site or something like that. But where it's going to continue is, once they get in, it's the ones that are not exploiting it right now, the ones that are actually not making a whole lot of noise, that are landing and establishing a footprint and a persistence place that they can come back and use later, are the ones that have me more concerned. I don't know, Melissa, Chris, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, so when I get this a lot of, like, how do I know if I've been hacked by this? Well, part of the mechanism by which this attack works is writing to a log file, right? So the evidence is going to be in the log file. I think for a lot of people, the challenge is in finding where those log files might exist, especially if it's like a third-party application. So this is where if you don't have access to the files, or you didn't have the network monitoring to be able to see the packet come across, you want to start looking for things like those anomalous connections, anomalous parent-child relationships, and that's where being able to baseline your environment, which you can definitely start doing with Tanium, is powerful. And then you can start tracing those executed processes and looking for those weird lineages, looking for stuff going out over ports that you've never seen it go out of before. And that goes back to what I said earlier about a hunt mentality. You need to be looking for behavior, and you need to be looking for, is this normal in my environment? And when did it start? And why is it doing this now? And we could go down a whole rabbit hole of like microsegmentation and zero trust, but we don't have time for that today. But I think that's really, how do you know? It's going to be a little different. It's going to look a little different in every environment, and you need to know how to hunt.
Melissa, that brings us actually back to the SolarWinds attack and things of that sort. One of the key things that people said is, okay, but why is a server that is so important in your environment able to go out on arbitrary ports? Same thing for any of these other servers. Why are these systems able to go out? We all know it's a best practice, but yet we see success for these attackers. For varying reasons, people miss this basic step in their environments in terms of controlling outbound communications from these servers. So that's certainly a piece. We had a question that had come in asking about, hey, if a system isn't on the internet, how is it going to get exploited by this? The thing is, if I can control data input, if I can control strings of information that can ultimately get to a system that isn't on the internet. Maybe, ultimately make through a web server, through a middleware to a database, and there's something else on the back end that reads that information. That's when I can have it read it unsanitized and have it exploit at that point. So there are pathways to do this. Really, the attack is limited by the imagination of the attacker and how they can figure out how to chain different systems and data flows together to exploit systems that aren't immediately reachable. So yes, looking at systems that are not immediately on the internet, they are not as immediate of danger as those that are on the internet. So if you're having to prioritize which you go look at first, certainly go look at the ones that are internet accessible first, but don't neglect the rest that are in your environment.
Got it. Looking at sort of the scope of Log4j, is it operating system dependent? And the other part of the question is, if not, what operating systems can Tanium help look at in relation to this threat?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Melissa, you take it.
So as we sort of mentioned during Chris's initial remarks, so this is, Java runs on, as the little pop-up says when you're installing it, billions of devices. And so this is not necessarily a Windows only vulnerability. This is not a Mac only vulnerability. This is not Linux only. This is anything that can run Java could potentially be impacted by this. And that is to say pretty much everything. So don't make the mistake of thinking that you only need to focus on one part of your estate. You definitely need to be looking across. And we have developed guidance around Mac, around Windows, and around Linux.
Okay, cool. And how does an organization know, and I'm going to put in quotes, they're done with Log4j and they can move on to the next burning topic that they're working on?
This is a dangerous soapbox to get me on. So I've got a twofold answer to this question. So if you can deploy all of the patches for all of the software that is through all of your environment, then you could technically say you're done with Log4j, but I think we need to have a more important conversation around security as a process. This is not a one-time exercise. By the time you've finally done, if in a perfect world, you could deploy all of the patches to all of the software, to all of the endpoints, there would be a new vulnerability that could be just as bad or worse. And so, you have to become as dynamic as the security landscape, which is constantly changing. Every time a new asset joins your network, every time a new software is installed, your attack surface has changed. Every time a researcher pokes at a bug a little bit, new information is emerging, and we're seeing that left and right. So this could get into a whole conversation around the culture around change, because we're getting a lot of customers who say, I can't patch that. That's a business critical application. I can't take it offline. Well, if it's critical to patch. And I think that we need to have, more conversations and leverage this as an opportunity to change the culture where, risk acceptance is a temporary mitigation that buys you time to mitigate, like to truly patch and remediate. It is not a permanent state.
Melissa, with this issue in particular, we've seen revisions and updates that have come out because the second round was related to a denial of service attack that you could execute. So if you have a critical app,
well, that's been upgraded to full RCE again.
Yeah, I mean, but even if it was only a denial of service, if it's your critical application and someone can remotely knock it offline, I think you've already made your case for why you need to patch it. But even if you could go and patch everything, you have to understand that there's going to be versions of installers that are sitting out on the web that someone from your IT organization or elsewhere is going to pull down because they want to test something out, or they had an old installer on their laptop that they pull out and they mistakenly grab the wrong one, and suddenly you've reintroduced some of these old things in your environment as well. So Charles, and to answer to your question, even for this issue, you're probably not going to be done anytime soon, because you're going to have unpatched versions accidentally reintroduced into your environment for a good long while. It's not going to be until we as an industry get to a point where we publish software bill of materials for everything and that people are trained to religiously check those bill of materials every time they do an install, that we'll get to a point where that type of a problem that I described won't happen anymore.
Awesome. I'm going to start wrapping up here. The one question we kept getting over and over again, and I want to kind of save it for the end, is what if folks want to get their hands on Tanium software to bring it into their environment and just start looking for stuff? How would they go do that?
So our community article has exactly those redirections to contact somebody. If you are an existing customer, please reach out to Tanium support to make sure that you are well aware of all of the things we're making available for you to be able to help in times like this. The other one is, if you are a prospect, if you're a new customer that's investigating what we can do from a Tanium perspective, we've also got a link in our community article there to the trytanium.com that will spin up a Tanium as a service instance for you to start getting into and understanding what we can provide.
Awesome. So just to kind of reiterate and wrap up here, I want to give everyone back some time. I know our schedules are busy, and you obviously have a lot of work ahead of you, hopefully to get Log4j into a good state before the holidays here. But please get in touch with us. We're here to help. I was able to pull 3 of our top experts on this call. We have a lot of experts that are behind the scenes working with customers. We're happy to engage with you and your organization wherever you're at in the process right now. Don't worry if you're just getting started. Don't worry if you're knee deep in it and you got stuck somewhere. Engage us. We're here to help. We have a community article that is rapidly expanding daily. We're updating this thing, if not multiple times a day. As new information comes about, as we learn more, as we're able to develop new content, we want to get it out to folks that are using Tanium as quickly as we possibly can. So keep your eyes peeled on that. And then last but not least, we are going to continue to publish how-to guides and demos and white papers and as much content as we can possibly make available. If you've got ideas of things you want to see from us, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to look at that as well. We are going to send out a link to this webinar. So if you came in late or you missed certain portions of it, you'll have an opportunity to go back and take a look at this. Feel free to share it amongst your teams as well. But I want to wrap up by saying thank you very, very much for your time today. I know your time is precious. You got a lot on your plate. We're here to help. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a beautiful holiday and a great new year as well. Thank you.